Well, fellas, it's been a while since we've done an EDHREC room episode. It's been a minute, hasn't it?
Well, it's also been a minute since we've had a day quite like today. I don't want to say today was a red wedding level, but it was pretty close for some people.
This is obviously being recorded on a Monday, and Joey logged on by saying, well, boys, it's been quite a week. And he is not wrong. That has very much been the vibe so far today.
Lemon, it's only Tuesday.
Lemon, it's only Tuesday. Yeah.
Yeah.
You beat me to it, Joey. I mean, every Commander player out there found out what it was like to play Splinter Twin in Modern years ago. That's basically what's happened.
So, yeah, for folks not immediately in the know, I imagine a lot of videos are coming out today. A lot of episodes are getting published today about the recent ban announcement that we just got from the Commander Rules Committee, where a historic 4 cards were all simultaneously banned. We are bidding adieu to Dockside Extortionist, to Mana Crypt, to Jeweled Lotus, and to Nadu. Rest in peace, I guess. Like, wow.
Yep.
Maybe real quick to set the tone, you guys. Let's go through each card and each say if we are for the ban or against the ban. And maybe that can signal people like where our biases are or whatever. But like to kind of set the tone for the conversation.
Sure.
So for instance, starting with Mana Crypt, like what are the votes there?
I wouldn't have thought I was for it, but I'm perfectly okay with Mana Crypt being banned.
I would say I am pro banning as well.
Consider me pro-neutral. Dockside Extortionist.
Pro. Very pro.
I'm the most pro on Dockside.
Co-sign with you, Dana. I'm also the most pro on Dockside Extortionist. Jeweled Lotus.
I think I would go neutral anti-ban, but mostly neutral. This one, it's hard to talk about this one without more context, but in a word, neutral anti-ban.
Yeah.
Pro ban. I am, of the 3, this is the one I have the least positive thoughts on, but I'm also pro in this case.
Interesting. I'm actually anti-ban on this one.
Okay.
And then finally, Nadu.
100% very, very pro. This card can get rocketed into the sun.
Yeah, this is kind of off to the side of the other 3 because it's for different reasons.
Right.
But I'm very pro too. I think this is a miserable card to play against. A couple times I've seen it and I'm glad it's gone.
I'll say I don't think it needed it, but I'm also not sorry. Like, bye-bye, birdie. So, okay.
Social media has been very contentious at best in response to this. So I think it is worth kind of giving some breath to the explanations that they gave. So first up, Mana Crypt. Everyone knows Mana Crypt. It's the 0 mana, taps for 2 colorless. At the beginning of upkeep, you flip a coin. If you lose the flip, deals 3 damage to you. So about Mana Crypt, they said coming down for no mana on turn 1, quite possible to have the explosive start with Mana Crypt into Signet, Talisman, land, another Signet, and leaving players with upwards of 5+ mana on turn 2. In games that go over 12 hours, the accumulated threat of damage from Mana Crypt provides a reasonable counterbalance for this explosive effect. But when you're snowballing to a turn 6 or turn 8 win, it's a meaningless drawback. And I very much agree. This card was probably one of the best mana rocks in the game, which is why it was so prevalent.
Next, we have Jeweled Lotus, and the RC writes it's another card that can give you 5 mana on turn 2. Jeweled Lotus does it without even needing a good hand. Though you're restricted in what you can do with the mana, 4 and 5 mana commanders can pack a significant punch nowadays. They often draw you cards to make up for the one-shot mana, and they have defensive abilities such as Ward that can't be interacted with early in the game. So again, it's another thing that lets you do something unreasonably early in the game.
As is also the case with the infamous Dockside Extortionist, 2 mana, getting you all the treasures for each artifact and enchantment your opponent controls. They write that Dockside isn't normally quite as explosive in the early game as the other 2 cards, but it can still go mana positive on turn 2 and start generating substantial treasures after that. It's been on the border for years, ain't that the truth? And we've shied away from taking action in the past because the card has scaled well with the power level of the table, but it's a frequent contributor to the more egregious snowballing starts. And kind of covering all 3 of these pieces of ostensibly fast mana cards. They're writing that Commander has always had the potential for someone to get out to a fast start and be the first arch-villain in the game, but that advantage has been balanced by having multiple players gunning for them once that happens. You know, everyone comes after the archenemy. But in the past few years, notably since Strixhaven, they say that they've seen a pattern of stronger mid-game cards, and that's leading to the player who skips past the early game being able to snowball their advantage straight through to the win. Occasional games like that are fine, but it shouldn't be common, and they want to take steps to bring that frequency down a bit by banning 3 of the most explosive plays in the format. Woof. So that's the first 3.
Yeah, only the first 3. And the last one, Nadu, they do get to point out, there's another ban here, and it's explosive, but in a different way. Given that Nadu Winged Wisdom has been ejected from multiple formats at this point, it's no surprise we took a close look at it for Commander, and sometimes hugely problematic cards in other formats like Oko are fine for Commander, Nadu was not that. Part of the problem was, like I said, the dedicated combo decks you have to build around. Dropping Nadu into a normal Simic shell still runs the risk of grinding the game down to a slog of resource accrual, interacts badly with cards that are staples in play, most notable Lightning Greaves, and monopolizing all the time in the game. 100% correct there too. Not an experience they wanted to risk, so Nadu also gets the ban, making it 4 cards. But I think Nadu might be the least surprising of the 4.
Yeah. Have we seen 4 bans? That's 4 is a lot. Usually we get like a ban and an unban. And not only that, but Nadu, the turnaround time on the ban for Nadu, I think the only thing that was faster than that was like maybe Lutri, which was, of course, banned right out of the gate for, you know, it's ridiculous. Like the companion tax on Lutri is not a tax in Commander, ergo yada yada.
Very obvious reasons, yeah.
But like, yeah, it's actually a rather relatively quick turnaround time on Nadu specifically.
This one, I get why they let it live, wanting players to get a chance to play with it, experience it, see if Rule 0 would regulate it, like it has a lot of problematic commanders, like Turgid, like the new Owl Bear Maha that makes all your creatures have toughness 1. Letting it breathe a little bit, get a chance to self-regulate, I understand it. But also, God, what a miserable experience. It's the Paradox engine all over again, I think.
Yeah.
It's one of the most egregious design missteps that we've seen in a very, very long time. And I think that's a message that is being sent with Nadu's ban. It's just like, y'all, what were you doing? What were you thinking? The way that this card wound up at the end of the process is, I think irresponsible is maybe the word I would use, which is the thing that even the designers of Modern Horizons 3 have acknowledged that like, yeah, no, this was a misstep and it's banned in a whole lot of places. Commander, it makes sense to have given a chance, Matt, as you noticed, but like, it's not a surprise to see it's followed suit.
Given a chance. And yeah, like you pointed out, Michael Majors, who is the lead designer of Modern Horizons, owned it. Like, yeah, this card should not have shipped the way it did. That stinks because now we have to ban another card, but there are certain cards that you can kind of trust the player base to experiment with a little bit. I don't think Nadu was one of them, just for the sake of, man, there's all these, like they point out in the statement, non-deterministic wins that take forever to resolve, and it's just not a pleasant experience for anybody.
There are certain points where players can and should advocate for the type of experiences that they want to have in games. And there are certain cards that make that process extremely difficult too. And cards that launch you forward, cards that are maybe too proactive, as is the case with all of these, is one of the most difficult places for everyone to draw their line.
I also do think it's kind of not a coincidence that the Commander player base that as a whole agrees basically on nothing has said 0 about the Nadu ban. There's been plenty of conversation I've seen today about the other 3 cards. Everyone's kind of like, yeah, Nadu, we see that coming. That makes sense. That's fine.
But yeah, that's where we're at. I think we all woke up with a little bit of a surprise today.
The Crypt one shocked me. Not that I don't think it's a good ban, but like after this amount of time, I'm surprised that they pulled the trigger on it.
I agree. Some of them felt a little bit rampaging ferocity, if that makes sense. I guess sort of preemptive. It's like once one of those dominoes fell, it sort of feels like the others had to. Because we all know that if they had only banned one of those cards for the reasons of fast mana, then everyone would have pointed to the other cards and said, well, if you're banning things for reasons of fast mana, then why do these still exist? So it really feels like if they were going to do one, they kind of had to do all of them, is I think the corner that they felt that they were put into. Because if they only did one, that would have raised a lot more eyebrows. I think for a lot of folks, there's also kind of a feeling of maybe, oh, it's about time for some of these, Mana Crypt especially. A buddy of mine messaged me that he felt that this ban was almost like 10 years late, which made him wonder, and I think this is a great point, how long they've had a discourse about this one specifically, about whether or not it ought to be banned. You know, it only just got banned now, but it's probably the kind of thing that was talked about for a really long time. Also seems important to mention that, like, probably not every member of the rules committee is in total agreement about this. Like, they'll present as a united front, but I bet there's been a lot of disagreement. It just doesn't make sense to paint everything with a broad brush, I guess.
Well, and I think this is probably, I don't know what you two think, one of the most significant days in Commander. Just the sheer just like power level of these cards that have been banned. It's an enormous shift. We were kind of talking before we started recording. I don't remember the last time I saw many of these cards in my games, just because these aren't the power levels that I play at. But at the people who do have to see them, they are definitely oppressive level.
Yeah, I do see them out in the wild more often than I would like, and at play levels that people aren't probably playing those kind of cards at. And I think the problem with these three in particular versus something like, say, Mox Diamond is because these three show up pretty regularly in reprint sets and things like that. I think that gives them an excuse to play them even if they do know how powerful they are. Well, it just showed up in that reprint set and I cracked one, so therefore it must be fine for me to put it in this, 6 power pod I'm playing at. I think that's a thing that these three did that you don't really see from a Gaia's Cradle. That's obviously a busted card. You can't really tell yourself that it's perfectly okay because it was in a precon like you can with Dockside. And I think that was the problem with all three of those.
Well, I also think it's just exciting to, like, you opened a really expensive card, you want to use it.
Sure.
I don't think it's it's kind of just as simple as that. Like, if I was lucky enough to open, one of those, I'd be like, oh, I want to put it somewhere because there's something thrilling about that. And there are ways in which that can cause you to maybe self-deceive on occasion. Sometimes that can be the case for players, but for the most part, it's just like, man, if I open one of these, I'd be so delighted to be able to have the chance to use it. These things were huge, like $100 in some cases, if not all three of them. And I'll totally copped it like, y'all, I actually just got a jeweled Lotus. I traded through it with Cardsphere. Just a little bit ago. And the reason I got it wasn't to put it into like a crazy OP deck or anything. I put it into my commander deck where every card has to say the word commander on it because I was really excited to have a third piece of ramp in my commander deck because it's one of the very few cards that can ramp you while also saying commander on it. Well, I ain't gonna play it there now.
And that's kind of a good point. Like, there's definitely a lot of folks that are like, oh, I really want this. I want this Dockside for my Goblin deck, or, I just want to play a little bit stronger and I'm going to trade for a Mana Crypt or save up to buy a Mana Crypt. And like, there are people that just took a bath on these cards because of this banning. And I definitely feel bad about that.
I mean, I'm one of them. I own one of each of these cards. I own, I think 3 Docksides. I wasn't even playing them in a deck anymore. I took them out because I just didn't want to play at that level anymore. But it isn't just us that took a bath. And it isn't just other players out there who own more copies of these cards than we do. It's game stores that took a bath on these cards too. And I think that's a bit of where my heart has been today. It's just like, oh, that impacts the business. And to be clear, I don't think that this choice was made without consideration to those game stores, but it is still kind of where my thoughts are at today.
Yeah.
The three big ones, I think they've been reprinted and they keep going back up. Like Jeweled Lotus was reprinted in Commander Masters. Mana Crypt was just reprinted and had some special versions too. Every time it gets reprinted, it's getting a little bit cheaper and a little bit cheaper. And so it's going to start creeping down for those lower power levels, which means it's affecting more and more games.
Let's also acknowledge the numbers here, because the three of us have said that we don't see these regularly. I just said that I have been taking Dockside out of my red decks lately. But these are popular cards. Dockside Extortionist was showing up in 347,983 decks. That's 16% of decks that were eligible to play Dockside were doing so. 16% of decks that contain red. And Jeweled Lotus was showing up in 7% of decks that were eligible to play it. Mana Crypt was showing up in 503,251 decks. 500,000 decks, 11% of all commander decks, according to the data on EDHREC. Which, of course, there are plenty of decks that are not logged online, but this is a significant percentage. These were played cards.
Yeah, and for some context there, Crypt was the 11th most played artifact in all of EDH. Jeweled Lotus was the 15th most played artifact, just flat overall. And Dockside was the 7th most played red card.
Yeah.
So very, very popular for all of these.
Yeah, all of them were super popular. I didn't play them in any of my decks. It's just not the power level I go for. But man, the people that did, it's making a huge, huge impact. Like we said, because just the numbers alone back up, these things were not just powerful, but popular.
Yeah. I mean, even Nadu, which we've spent a little bit less time acknowledging, but Nadu was bolting up there. It already had 6,000 decks to it.
Yeah.
And heck, we just finished up the salt scoring as well. We just did an episode releasing all the data about that. Nadu was the 3rd saltiest card in the format. It had a salt score of 3.04 out of 4. Dockside has regularly been in the top of the list as well. It had a salt score of 2.61 out of 4. That's the 14th saltiest card in the entire format. Mana Crypt was farther down the list, but it had a score of 2.1. Jeweled Lotus had a score of 2.23. These cards caused a lot of hubbub. I think they were pretty frequently some of the most named cards in pregame conversations when people were trying to figure out what the power level of the pod was going to be.
Well, I mean, let's talk about Jeweled Lotus, because that seemed like the one that we were most divided on. I mean, we all kind of agreed, Mana Crypt probably needs to go, Dockside probably needs to go. So, Joey, you said you weren't for banning of Jeweled Lotus, and I think it's just because you just got one, and so obviously you're very angry about it.
Oh, wow.
But really, let's unpack Jeweled Lotus at least, because I think the three of us were fairly divided.
Yeah, I think Jeweled Lotus just reads to me like so much of a ritual, like literally like a dark ritual, which is a card that I'm not playing in many other decks. The mana accumulation that it's capable of never registered quite as, I guess, egregious as what the other two cards are capable of. In fairness, though, of course, like likening an artifact, a permanent card, a sacrificable thing, to a dark ritual, which is a spell. Those are two very different levels of abusability. You know, it'd be like comparing a Hull Breacher to a Plagiarize. Like those are two very different levels of abusability. So, you know, there's definitely a distinction there. The recurability of a Jeweled Lotus is also worth noting, just like the blinkability of a Dockside is worth noting. Jeweled Lotus, I don't disagree with what was written about it. It kind of reads to me as the third domino in the line. It kind of feels to me as though if they were going to ban something like Dockside, then everyone would point at the other cards, the other pieces of fast mana in the room and go, well, what about those? And as a result of that, something like Mana Crypt, something like Jeweled Lotus kind of also were swept into that same argument in ways that we should clarify Sol Ring was not. Sol Ring has been given a very clear exception about like, listen, this isn't all the precons. There's something iconic about Sol Ring. We can all live with a piece of it. Sometimes it's still exciting, but this many pieces of fast mana seem to be the problem. So it's more about like the population of them than the individual card by card basis, I guess. But anyway, I don't know. I see games where Jeweled Lotus could still produce a fun time. It's the one that feels less egregious compared.
I see where you're coming from with it. It still can produce a fun time. And I think that's why I'm generally open to it, because you are so restricted on the type of ways you can use that mana. Yeah. I mean, short of like jumping through a lot of hoops, but like if you're jumping through hoops, that opens the doors to a lot of things. The reason I get it is because you're also talking about probably the most easily abusable card type in Magic.
Sure. With
artifacts, you're able to loop. There's so many different ways for you, and it still comes down to it's a 0 mana ritual versus a ritual that requires mana to start.
Yeah.
Dark ritual, all of those you need mana, and the point that kind of sealed it for me that like, okay, I'll buy in with this was you don't even need a good hand, like the announcement points out. You don't need a good hand for Jeweled Lotus to be super impactful. You need a lot of times a land and a Jeweled Lotus, and you're in business.
My main thought about these in this individual level is if Mana Crypt would have gotten banned, I would have been like, okay, but why is Dockside okay? And had Dockside gotten banned, I would have been like, why is Mana Crypt okay? At no point would I have been like, well, how did you guys forget Jeweled Lotus? That yeah. That one does not seem like the others. So I understand the objections on those grounds because that was my reaction as well. That said, I, unlike you, don't feel like there's any situation where Jeweled Lotus was a good time. It's definitely like not as ubiquitously good as the other two cards are. Much more narrow suite of decks where I think it's useful. But I think the decks where it's good, it's also creates not great play patterns necessarily. And I having it gone, I think has more upside than having it present.
Okay.
Now, is that a ban criteria? I don't know, but like that's why I'm okay with it.
Well, and to be honest, like, you know, kind of going back to the financial hit of all of these, like Jeweled Lotus was the chase card from the first Commander Legends set, and it was very deliberately put there to be a chase card for Commander players. I think also like some of the others kind of represent that as well. You know, the fact that Nadu was very explicitly created to appeal to Commander players, which they broke Modern over chasing that. To me, a little bit of this reads as kind of a teensy bit of like sticking it to WotC for making these chase cards in these sets. It's a little bit of like hey, Wizards, this is eventually what happens when you are deliberately trying to appeal to Commander players this forcefully. This is a very clean example of the kind of thing that Wizards themselves, if they were purely in charge, would never make a ban on. And the problem, of course, is that the people who actually take the brunt of that are the players themselves, which does stink. But I'm hoping that this can be read as a clear message to Wizards of the Coast about like, here are some of the consequences that eventually happen if you keep trying to chase this specific way of selling packs. They're not always healthy for the game that you are trying to be a steward of.
That never would have occurred to me, but if that's the case, I'm kind of on board with the RC occasionally cracking WotC on the nose with a rolled up newspaper and saying, no, yeah, I'm okay with that. Maybe that's probably healthy long term. That seems healthier to me long term than WotC pushing the envelope as far as they can to sell packs.
Well, do you two remember when Jeweled Lotus was first previewed and the outrage about that card and how it should have been banned out the gate and how it never should have been allowed to be printed, and now all of a sudden people are mad that it's being banned?
Sure.
The duality of the internet is truly a thing of wonder. There was so much going on there. Yeah, Jeweled Lotus, like I said, I'm neutral anti, just because, again, it is fairly specific on what you can use mana for. But I don't know if it goes so far as like, hey, don't print these types of cards. And that one, I don't know. It's a citing intent that I'm not really on board with.
No, that's fair. That's fair. And this is me certainly more hypothesizing.
Yeah.
But like the language that you just pointed out, the rhetoric that we see online, is kind of where my heart has been today. It's been a bit of a bummer. I see a lot of people speaking about this, about how like ridiculous it is, and a lot of people saying to dismantle the rules committee and crap like that, when not a month ago they were screaming to dismantle the rules committee because they hadn't taken action and hadn't banned Nadu or Dockside or whatever. Just like seeing those extreme amounts of language, no matter what happens, has been kind of bumming me out today.
Well, yeah, Joe, you even had a video not too long ago about that very subject. So I agree with you. Just the way that people kind of handle themselves when it's anonymously behind a keyboard isn't always the most comforting.
Yeah, it was a video about the birds and the bands, I guess you could say, where I wanted to just sort of analyze the way that conversations have been happening online. And to me, how that rhetoric is evidence of a lot of pain that is present in the Magic player base, who keep running into certain frustrating experiences in their favorite hobby, a place that they're going to try and relax. It again did seem that like when action didn't happen, there was a lot of outrage. When action did happen, there's been plenty of outrage too.
Right.
Yeah.
It is a very plain example of there is no winning here.
Sure. Right.
Any action, including not taking action, pisses people off.
The RC will always, no matter what, simultaneously be doing not enough and too much.
Yeah, it really has that vibe.
Absolutely.
There can be plenty to be frustrated about. We've just got to find a productive way to respond to it. If the conversations that we want to have are about whether some of these cards are indeed too powerful, I want to make sure that we center the conversations about whether or not those cards are indeed too powerful, rather than pointing fingers, placing blame, etc. Because I don't think that that's a good way to have the conversation, and I think that can end up being pretty alienating and pretty unfortunate.
So I guess let's shift a little bit then away from that. I think the people that are most directly impacted by this is the CEDH crowd. They're the ones that are probably playing the most Docksides and Mana Crypts as kind of a gateway into the format. I've seen a lot of people giving that rhetoric out there of like CEDH is a ruin. CEDH, like nothing matters there anymore. One thing that I noticed and I really wanted to kind of make sure I'm able to say here on this show is CEDH, for everybody out there, it's going to be just fine. CEDH is going to keep doing exactly what they've always been doing, which is playing within the confines of the rules that exist, and they're going to play it to the extreme limits. Like that is still possible. That is still something that they are going to do. Like the cards that exist in that pool are different, but the mentality and the mindset behind CEDH, that has not changed and will not change. And I think CEDH people are going to be just fine.
They are a very scrappy lot. I've seen a handful of people saying, hey, don't use me as a cudgel. Like, I'm a CEDH player and I'm pretty sure I'll be all right. Like, I've seen plenty of that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that like all the things I've said today are within the confines of non-CEDH Magic. I maybe it is devastating to CEDH. I have no idea, so I'm not even going to attempt to opine on whether or not these bans impact that format or that variant of the format or not at all. It's outside my wheelhouse. I don't know. I'm speaking exclusively from like non-CEDH EDH here.
Yeah.
And it's been a pretty common talking point from plenty of creators, from plenty of folks online. I mean, even one of the rules committee members is a very explicit CEDH channel. Like, he plays a whole bunch of it. But like, he acknowledges that trying to ban for CEDH is an endless game of whack-a-mole and not necessarily the healthiest direction.
And I think a really important thing to keep in mind, because I don't know how many of our listeners have played 60 card formats before. In my experience, because I did play a lot of 60 card Magic for a long time, there's always going to be something that is the best. That's just how this game works. Right. When you take out the existing thing that is the best, something else will rise up. Something else will fill that power void. There isn't just a vacuum that doesn't get filled. There will always be a de facto best thing to be doing, whether that's the Demonic Consultation and Thassa's Oracle stuff now, or if because Mana Crypt is gone and Dockside is gone, do things shift into different colors? What does that... The power is going to get redistributed. That's just how competitive formats work. And so, like I joked about Splinter Twin, but that's how it works. Like Splinter Twin was a bannably overwhelming, powerful deck, and it had to get taken out because it was just occupying so much of the metagame, and something else filled the void from there. That's what's going to happen with CDH. That's what happens in standard when things get banned. That's just kind of how everything works.
I don't disagree.
I certainly appreciate what the rules committee is saying to take aim at here, though. Like an archenemy getting ahead so quickly that they're able to then maintain that position and the other players can't knock them out of that position. That's a cadence of play that I've seen happen a lot too, and trying to restrict that from happening so that there can be more of that exciting back and forth and games don't end after turn 6 or whatever. Like, that's a mission I can absolutely get on board with. And there's a lot to be said about how extremely proactive each of these cards happens to be as well. Yeah, it kind of has the Primeval Titan situation on it, where like the amount of advantage that these procure is a harder thing to regulate in regular pregame conversations compared to the things like Stasis, who have effects on the game that stall things out compared to launching things forward. It's very clear that how much something can launch a game forward and end a game quickly is something very much worth paying attention to, because other things are a little bit easier to self-police maybe, or self-regulate. It's certainly the case that there are a lot of ways that that eventuality can still occur even without any of these cards. Even if we haven't been playing some of these cards, we've still seen some games take that form. But at the same time, 4 cards being banned is already kind of a lot. This swells the ban list in a way that I was not expecting.
Yeah.
We've spent most of our time on the 3 fast mana pieces. And again, it does sort of feel like if one of them went, they kind of all eventually had to go. Sol Ring, of course, getting the exception because it's sort of iconic, I guess. Nadu is getting a lot less of our attention. But to me, I'll say like Nadu is... It's both a surprise and not a surprise, because I feel like once you sit down for a game, if you see someone else's commander, it's usually a little bit easier to say, to that compared to surprises from the 99. Obviously, there have been Leovolds and things like that, but like a card has to be especially egregious for it to be legendary and get a ban. In my eyes, I don't know if you guys feel the same way about how bans operate or how pregame discussions can navigate commanders that are egregious versus cards in the 99 that are egregious. Do you guys have thoughts on that?
I mean, that's where I honestly would prefer them to be a little more liberal with bans, because something is going to have a significantly higher impact. Like by nature of the format, things in the command zone are going to have an impact on more games than they would if they were in the 99. So I'm glad that Nadu got early attention. I understand why people would have liked it a little bit more. I wish I'd give a little more attention, but then again, like thankfully the social aspect of the format has kept a lot of the other cards that I think I would have voted to be banned if I were on the RC for their problematic behavior in the command zone. Thankfully, the social piece of the format has kept those out. Like I said, Maha, Its Feathers at Night, probably one of the least interesting designs I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, I think for a commander to get banned, it has to be a problem on multiple levels. And I think that's one of the things Nadu hit. It was a problem in that it was really, really powerful, but it wasn't just really, really powerful. It was really, really powerful, and it was a card that sucked up a whole ton of game time. I think if it just did one of those 2 things, it would probably still be alive. But the fact that it did both of those 2 things is why it ate a ban.
None of us seem to feel that these cards markedly cause commander games to become better.
Yes.
Is that an accurate read?
Yeah. That's definitely my thought on it.
But let me try asking this, you guys. Very plainly, these are pretty expensive cards. And like, maybe we kind of glossed by it a little bit earlier, but like, Dana, as you said, players are taking a bath on some of these now, right? And it's entirely possible that that has biased my opinions. I don't know. But I do still feel like, oh man, I mean, players want security in the cards that they purchase. Some of these are really valuable pieces, you know? Does that have any effect on you guys? Like how pricey these specific cards were and the volume of bans here. The volume of bans without an unban as well. Do you guys have any thoughts on the ramifications of that?
I feel bad about it in the same way that like I felt bad that the people that had a cool Golos Gates deck lost their entire deck. Like I am sympathetic to people that are in that situation, but that's not a reason not to do it.
It stinks. But also, there's other uses, like Commander Cube is a thing that you can do to play the game, and it's a great way to play. I have gotten more and more into Cube over the past few months. There's other ways to play it, and there's kind of a double-edged sword here at play too, where if you ban something too early, then people will think, well, you jumped the gun, and you didn't give it time to like people to play with the cards. But if you don't ban it soon enough, then that just gives it more time for cards to get into players' hands and people to obtain more and more copies that they sought out and they spent money on. So it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of situation. And it's just, I don't envy the rules committee, basically is what I'm saying, to make decisions that are going to impact the financials of players out there.
There is also always going to be a danger if any of us treat Magic like it's an investment portfolio, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It stinks, but also like this is Magic, and it happens.
This does feel big to a lot of people, and I don't think that's unjustified. To me, the impact on game stores is especially noteworthy. Which, for the record, I don't think that this is a hasty decision. I don't think that that's something that was not considered. I think it was considered carefully. Even if I feel a little bummed, bewildered, surprised, whatever, by the way that this particular ban announcement happened, I don't assume that just because they came to a conclusion that I myself might not have come to, I don't assume that that means that therefore they haven't considered all the same things that I have considered. We can both be understanding the same things and still evaluate them differently or still come to different conclusions. That can simultaneously be true at the same time that these are cards that don't necessarily make games of Commander more fun.
Yeah.
And it does come down to like where we are ourselves drawing our lines. And I just hope that the conversations can be constructive. And that's why we wanted to talk. Like, yeah, we've got a show. This is like kind of like a big bit of news for us that we can't just like ignore. But I wanted to check base with you guys. I'm just like, do you think that these make for better Commander games? And if we've all come to the conclusion that like, oh, probably not, like that's why we ourselves have not played them, that's the kind of thing worth ruminating on. If these are the kinds of cards that were regularly coming up in pregame conversations as like maybe problem cards, that's the kind of thing to take note of. And that is kind of the takeaway that I feel I'm coming with. I hope that that's where we can center a lot of conversations.
I do think this might be something worth revisiting down the road. Just once we've seen it play out and see how it actually impacts things, come back and see what we still think about it in, you know, a month or something, and record one of these and just talk about our experiences and what it's done to actual pods we've played. Because I am genuinely curious to see what changes this rots on the actual pods games we see.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to wrap it up. Is we had our gut reaction. Now let's see what our mind thinks of it here later on.
Yeah, I think that's wise too. Well, I hope we've been able to kick back and relax a bit despite all of this news here in the EDH rec room. It occurs to me that one of the best cures for worries about Magic is often to go and play some Magic.
Yeah,
I suppose that seems like a good compromise there.
I am in.
Yeah, let's do it. This is obviously a pretty big announcement, so let us know what you think out there in listener land. And of course, remember to EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck. Or in this case, EDHREC your room before you wreck your room. That's so silly.